Hello, welcome to another episode of Flavor Bytes. I'm Eric with the Vigo County Public Library, and we are here in the West Branch kitchen to make homemade mozzarella cheese. Now, with a few basic ingredients, this is a fairly simple process, and we'll use this cheese to go along with a summery caprese salad. Now, you don't need a lot of special ingredients or equipment to make mozzarella at home. You will need some milk. We're using a gallon of full-fat milk. If you can get non-homogenized milk, that would be the best. What we have is homogenized. It will work, but it does work better if you get non-homogenized milk. And you will want to try to get a low pasteurization milk. Do not get ultra pasteurized because they heat the milk too hot and it destroys the protein for cheese making. It will not work for cheese making. So this is just homogenized, pasteurized, full-fat milk, and it works just fine. We will also need some citric acid, and this will lower the pH in the milk for cheese making. And we'll need rennet. We're using a vegetable rennet, and this will help the curds and the whey separate. And we'll use some salt to add a little bit of flavor to the mozzarella cheese. As far as special equipment, you just need a large pot to cook everything in, and you will need a thermometer. It's very important to keep an eye on the temperature because you don't want things to get too hot, otherwise it will destroy the proteins in the milk. And also a strainer. This is a fine mesh strainer to help separate the curds from the whey when it's time to do that. Before we heat up the milk and get started with our cheese making, we need to prepare our rennet and our citric acid. We're using rennet tablets, and so these need to be crushed up and dissolved in about a quarter cup of water. You should start out with about a quarter of a tablet for a gallon of milk, and if you need more, work your way up. I've done this recipe a few times and found that I need about a half a tablet to make this work with this particular milk that I'm using. So I'll take my knife and just chop up the tablet into smaller pieces. And you want to try to get it as fine as you can. And once you have it to a nice fine powder, you'll want to put it into a bowl. And we're going to add a quarter cup of filtered water. And then we will whisk this together to get the rennet to dissolve. We will add the rennet to the milk a little bit later, so you will want to give it a stir again before you add, but we'll get things started here. So now we will prepare our citric acid, and we have about 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid. You may find that you need a little bit more, a little bit less. This cheese making is a little bit of trial and error because it depends on the type of milk that you're using. So we've got about 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid. And I'm mixing that with a quarter cup of water, and I'm going to stir to dissolve. The first thing we want to do, we empty our gallon of milk into a large pot, preferably one that has a lid because we will want to put a lid on it. If you don't have a lid, you can always put an empty pan or cover it with foil. And we're going to slowly add the citric acid mixture while we stir. We don't want to add too much too quickly. We don't want the milk to curdle, but we do want the acid to lower the pH of the milk to make it a little more acidic. So I'm going to start stirring, and I'm going to slowly add the acid. I'm going to keep stirring just to make sure it's mixed really well. And then I'm going to turn the heat on to medium. And we want to heat the milk slowly until it reaches about 90-95 degrees. It can get up to about 100, but we really don't want to go over much over 100. Okay, so we are just under 100 degrees. I'm still stirring to distribute the heat evenly, and we're ready to add the rennet and take it off the heat. So I'll go ahead and turn the heat off, and I've got the bowl of rennet, and I'm going to go ahead and whisk it again since it's been setting. And just like with the citric acid, I'm going to slowly add this and continue to stir. We want to really make sure we mix in all of the rennet throughout the milk. Make sure you get all the rennet out of the bowl. I'm going to move this off the heat, and we can kind of slowly move back and forth, up and down, just mixing in the rennet with the milk. So we're going to put the lid on this and set a timer for 30 minutes. We'll come back and check it at 30 minutes to see how the curds have formed. It may need to go longer. I've had it have to go up to about an hour before, but we'll start checking it around 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, I checked on the curds and they weren't quite as set as I would like them. So I put the timer on for 15 minutes, and I also put a pot of water on to heat up. We want this water to be between 180 and 200 degrees. We're gonna use this later to help stretch our mozzarella cheese. So after the 15 minutes, we'll check on our curds again. And they're not quite as set as I would like. We're looking for a nice, smooth, very firm set curd, where if we were to put our knife in, it would pop up and split very nice and even. You can see it's still pretty runny, but different milks are gonna give you different results. So we're gonna go with this. This still should make really good cheese, and we will continue with these curds as we have them. So the first thing we're gonna do is, with our knife, we're gonna slice all the way down to the bottom of the pot, and we're just looking to cut our curds into square chunks. So we're gonna make some slices in one direction, and you can see that they're not quite smooth chunks. And then we're gonna go in the other direction to make nice cubes. And then we're gonna heat this back up. We wanna get this to about 110, and then we're gonna stir a little bit more before we actually drain off the whey. Okay, our curds here are about 110 degrees. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off, and then I'm gonna continue to stir for about 5 minutes. Okay, so after about 5 minutes of stirring, we're going to drain off the whey and put our curds in a nice fine mesh strainer to get as much whey as we can out of the curds. Now you can do this in a number of ways. Pouring it out would be not quite gentle enough. You can use a slotted spoon or some type of mesh scoop. I have a small colander here that fits inside this pot very nicely. So I'm going to use this to scoop out the curds and let as much whey drain out as possible. And then I'll transfer these to my fine mesh strainer that's over a bowl to catch even more of the whey. And once you've drained as much whey as you can, go ahead and transfer it over to your strainer, and continue doing this until you have as much of the curds out of the pot as you can. So once you've gotten as much of the curds out of the whey as you can use a spoon and gently move the curds around in the strainer to try to get even more whey. You can gently press to squeeze. Try to be gentle. We're not looking to mush these up any more than they already are. You see a lot of whey still coming out when I gently squeeze with a spoon. Then I'm going to dump the whey from the bowl back into the pot. We're going to reuse this bowl in a little bit, and then I'm going to leave the strainer sitting on the pot. Just let any of the excess whey drain out while I get everything else set up for making the mozzarella cheese. So while the curds are draining any of the excess whey, I've gathered the rest of my equipment to finish up our cheese making. We have a large bowl that we're going to add the curds to, and we have a pot of hot water. We want between 185 and 200 degrees on the water. And then you'll want an ice bath that we will put the formed, shaped mozzarella into to cool it down. And you'll need your salt to add flavor and texture to the cheese. We're using a cheese making salt, but you can use any salt that you prefer, kosher, sea salt. I would just recommend that you avoid iodized table salt as it will impart a flavor to the cheese when it's finished. A word of caution, we are dealing with very hot water. I highly recommend that you use some type of hand protection. I'm using a doubled up pair of food safe gloves. These do provide some protection, but if you can get flock lined gloves, that would provide a better heat barrier for your hand, because this water is very hot and I don't want you to burn yourself. So I've transferred the drained curds into a large bowl, and I'm going to pour the hot water slowly into this bowl. We're at about 190 degrees Fahrenheit, and we don't want to put the water directly on the curds because we don't want to shock the curds and have them expel all of the milk fat. We want the curds to come up to temperature nice and slowly and evenly, so this will require some patience. So I'm going to try to pour the water along the edge of the bowl, and I would like to cover the curds with this hot water. Okay, so now at this point, remember, we are dealing with very hot water, so be careful. I have double gloves and a spoon at the beginning. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to kind of press the curds together with a spoon. We want to be gentle. We don't want to force anything. We want the curds to come up to temperature nice and slowly. As they do, you'll see that these are starting to stick together and melt, and that's exactly what we're looking for. You can use your hands to bring the curds together in the hot water. We are looking for them to melt together and to form a nice melted ball of cheese. I can pick them up. You can see that it is very stringy and stretchy. We don't want to force anything with the mozzarella. It will stretch on its own. If you just pick it up and let it hang and watch it stretch down, that's really all of the force you want. You don't want to really knead it or stretch it. You just want to let it gravity do the work. Fold it over and let it stretch some more. You can help it, but don't really pull down on it. Just kind of let gravity do the work. So at this stage, you can add your salt. We've got about 2 teaspoons of our cheese salt. And I'm just gonna sprinkle it over our melting curds. And then as we stretch and fold, the salt will be incorporated into the cheese. So again, we'll let it stretch naturally, don't force anything. Fold it over and let it stretch. And you can see that the longer it's out of the hot water, the less it wants to stretch. So every once in a while, you do need to dip it in the hot water, heat those curds up again. Pull it out, and again, let it stretch nice and slowly. Fold it over and continue to let it stretch. You can also start to form it into a ball and tuck with your fingers into the center, and you can watch the cheese stretch across the outer surface. If it starts to tear or looks like it's not really wanting to stretch, get the cheese hot again. And if your water's cooled down, you can just add some more hot water to it. The more you handle the cheese and the more you stretch it, the firmer the final mozzarella will be. So if you like a really soft mozzarella, try not to handle it very much and try not to stretch it too much. If you like it a bit firmer, then you can do a little bit more. A lot of it's trial and error. I find that once you start making cheese, you'll want to make cheese all the time. So you'll get to learn what works for you, what works for the milk that you use, the rennet that you use, and your own personal taste. We see this is really stretching nicely on its own. My bottom hand's just guiding it. Now I feel like I'm ready to shape it into a mozzarella ball. There are many ways to shape mozzarella cheese. What we're gonna do is just a typical ball of mozzarella that you might find in a grocery store. I find that works really well for making the Caprese salad that we'll be doing later. So now that I have a nice pliable mozzarella cheese, what I'm gonna do is make a C with my hand, and I'm going to push the cheese up into my curved fingers, making a ball, pushing from the bottom, pushing the cheese up. And this is where you could decide how big of a ball of mozzarella you want to make. So once I get the size I want, I pinch my fingers, and then from beneath, I use my other forefinger to kind of tear the cheese off, cut it, and you have a nice ball of mozzarella cheese. Now this is very soft. If I leave it out, it will just completely flatten. It'll still be very delicious, but I want it to be a little more firm. So I'm gonna put it in the cold water while I form the rest of my cheese. And any small little leftover pieces, you can make them into small, tiny little mozzarella balls, or you can just eat it. So we've made our homemade mozzarella cheese from fresh milk. We have tomatoes and basil. This basil is fresh from our producer's garden. And we have a little bit of olive oil. And this is the basic setup you need for a nice summery caprese salad. We're gonna first start with slicing our mozzarella into some rounds here. Any knife will do. You don't wanna be too thin with it or too thick, so we have a nice, probably about a little over 1/4 inch slice right there. And we just wanna slice, I'm just gonna slice this whole ball of mozzarella. All right, we have our ball of mozzarella sliced. I'm gonna move this over here to the plate. You can slice the other cheese. Any cheese you don't eat, you can always store. You can put it in the ice water bath and put it in the refrigerator. You can store it with some of the whey that you had left over from making the cheese in the refrigerator. I find that when I make mozzarella cheese, it doesn't last long enough to actually put it in the refrigerator. I eat it way too fast. So it depends on how quickly you're gonna eat your cheese. I'm going to use a serrated knife to cut the tomato. It has a little more control and lets me cut it as thin or as thick as I want without squishing the tomato. So then we're going to arrange our tomatoes and our mozzarella cheese on a plate. Now, there's an endless variety of ways to do this. You can put all the tomatoes down, put the cheese on top. We're gonna kind of create a nice little layered effect with a slice of tomato, a slice of cheese, and kind of overlap a little bit. So now we have our tomatoes and our cheese, and we're gonna prepare our basil. So I've got a few leaves of basil that I've pulled off the stems. I'm gonna roll them up, kind of fold them, roll them up into a nice little spiral. And then I'm just gonna slice very thinly. Again, keeping your fingers back. When I I'm using my left hand with the basil. My fingers are curved in and holding the basil. If my fingers are out like this, I have danger of cutting my fingers with the knife. So I want to keep my fingers curved in, put the knife blade right up against my knuckles here, and go nice and slow to avoid cutting myself. So now I have a few small little cut strips of basil, and I'm just going to put these all along my Caprese salad here. Again, there's really no right or wrong way to do this, however you like it. Some people like all of their tomato and cheese cut into chunks, bite-sized chunks. Some people like to mix it into a more of a blended salad and not kind of like layers like this. And now we're gonna drizzle with a little bit of olive oil. You can put any number of toppings on here. You can add salt or pepper. You can put balsamic vinegar, but a nice drizzle of extra virgin olive oil completes your dish. And there you have it, fresh homemade mozzarella cheese and a tasty summery caprese salad. Hopefully you're able to get tomatoes and basil fresh from a garden, either your own, a friend, or visit your local farmer's market. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Flavor Bites, and I look forward to seeing you next time.